Okay, hey everyone, welcome to this week's current event stream. So, obviously, every week we update you on some of the biggest things that are happening in the United States and around the world. And because of what's going on right now with COVID-19, we're also going to include some updates with what's happening there. So, I'm Fatma Raja.
I'm Brandon Wu. We're
And
so excited.
So before we get started, make sure you're following Fiveable across all their social media. Brandon here is the chief TikTok officer at Fiveable, so he's always pumping out great content, and it's at Think Fiveable across all of our social media. And yeah, Brandon's just going to take it away.
Yeah, so we have our lovely weekly streams. You might have caught me at English language, an hour and a half ago. You'll see me at calculus in 30 minutes. You'll see all of our wonderful Gov streamers, our human geography and psych people on Tuesday, sciences on Wednesday, and history on Thursday. So we'll start off with our COVID-19 portion mainly, and then we'll kind of segue into some other stuff. But in terms of AP GoPo and AP Lang, I highly recommend you check out all of our streams. GoPo streams on Tuesday, we stream on Monday. We'll start with COVID-19, then we'll move into domestic and international current events, and finally conclude with the 2020 election update. So the crisis, it feels like it's been like, 7 weeks that we've been social distancing and quarantining. But at this point, we've seen that in Congress, and this has a pretty heavy AP GoPo tie-in. Right now, they're negotiating a fourth stimulus packaging that really concerns small businesses. Basically, it funds the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program. It gives $60 billion in funding for the Small Business Administration's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Basically, all this means is that we're supporting these smaller businesses who aren't mega corporations like Apple or Google or Amazon, and giving them funding so they don't go bankrupt. Also, there's also funding in the bill for hospitals and testing, although Democrats right now are demanding much more funding for like a national testing program. And in addition, we've seen that Republicans have mainly been saying that, Democrats are harming small businesses because they're not passing the bill. But in reality, we've seen that they're really trying to ramp up testing. And also the hospital funding that was in this bill was not previously in the original version of the bill that Republicans intended to pass. So that kind of demonstrates the whole argument of whenever we work towards compromise across party lines, it leads to beneficial impacts for all people. But also, we've seen that COVID-19 has had a global impact. We've seen that specifically in Turkey, there was like a twofold increase in cases and deaths, which has already led many people to kind of assume that Turkey was not reporting their numbers accurately. In terms of today's updates, as of about 5 minutes ago, the United States has 776,000 cases with 37,000 deaths. We have the most amount of cases and most amount of deaths, unfortunately, with Spain, Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, and France following the US, which already shows that China, which was like the original country where the virus started, has largely contained it, although many have been speculating that they are kind of misrepresenting their numbers, could be higher than expected. We've seen that many people have kind of created vaccines and have already begun testing them, although I think it's about a dozen or so companies who have created vaccines. But because of the difficulty in distribution and manufacturing right now due to COVID-19, it means that the earliest we'll see vaccines being distributed and actually given to people is in about 18 months. And it kind of corroborates the whole issue that COVID-19 could be a seasonal virus, that could go away and it could come back. So it all depends as to what kind of happens within the biological aspects of the novel coronavirus, But also we've seen that cases are doubling the fastest right now in Tanzania and Somalia, which is in East Africa. It's doubling about every 3 to 4 days compared to doubling every few weeks or so here in the United States. And so that demonstrates that socioeconomically less developed places, unfortunately, are going to suffer more without the health infrastructure. So Perla here has a question. Do you think if a company makes a virus, they would capitalize on it and make it at a high price? I'm assuming you're saying vaccine, and make it at a high price that a lot of people can't afford. Yeah, you're good, Perla. I get it. I get that. I would say that, companies would probably make a pretty high-priced vaccine. They've done it before with like drugs, so I wouldn't be surprised. Although if the government were to impose things like price controls, if you're an AP macro or micro that's in unit 1 and 2, that would probably mean that people would be able to afford it more, but there would be supply shortages. So it all depends on the company, because if they make prices too low or if it's capped, that means that it's going to go into a shortage because too many people are using the vaccine and they're not making a sufficient profit. But if they set the prices too high, only the rich and powerful are going to buy it, and low-income people are unfortunately going to suffer. Great question. Got a crazy tie-in from like a bunch of different AP subjects there. Also, we've seen that southern states are making the decision to reopen, and I'm being serious. Like literally, the most geographically south states are like making plans, including Falkmanized State, Texas, where we're seeing like a kind of like by mid-May or so, we're going to see that retail shops are going to open. But South Carolina beat us because today they already decided to open retail shops, gyms, hair salons. So that Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, I don't know why only unabbreviated Georgia there, but they're also opening other aspects of society as a whole. Like Florida opened their beaches, if I remember correctly. I think Georgia opened hairdressers. And it's kind of like a test. It's sort of like they're like lab rats, because we'll see if their cases start to surge, and then that will probably, kind of decide what other states do. Also, 1 in 5 cases in Ohio are unfortunately connected to their prison system, with 2,400 cases alone in the prison system. That's like 20%. And also in a variety, in a multitude of states, we've seen that unfortunately COVID-19 has begun to increase. So we're seeing that some states are more behind than others, like California and New York, which had their like pandemic crises in terms of like the doubling of deaths a few weeks ago. We're seeing that in Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, and a variety of other states. That's happening right now. So we're seeing that there's that kind of lagging effect. Moreover, we're seeing that in terms of other domestic and international current events, if I remember correctly, there is a lot going on actually outside of COVID-19. Current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz of the Blue and White Party agreed to a coalition government. And this is actually really, really beneficial because Israelis have this rule in their law that basically if no party gets a majority coalition, they have to do another election. So because there are like 20 different parties in Israel, unfortunately, Prime Minister Netanyahu has not been able to secure a coalition and has had 4 additional elections since 2016. Like imagine if Donald Trump was on the ballot 4 times between 2016 and today. Like that's insane. And finally, they agreed to kind of, govern together. And what that means is that for now until the next 18 months, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the prime minister and Benny Gantz is the defense minister, and then they swap after 18 months. Although some are saying that, right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is literally convicted for corruption. So many are arguing that he might just hold another election in 18 months. It's all speculation. Also, the Supreme Court, yeah, gosh, please no, banned non-unanimous jury verdicts today in Louisiana and Oregon in a court case called Ramos v. Louisiana. Basically, our 6th Amendment says that in trials by jury, decisions have to be unanimous. And we saw that basically the Supreme Court reaffirmed today that they kind of overturned this previous case called Apodaca v. Oregon, which said that essentially you were not able, basically states could have juries in courts that were not unanimous to convict someone. And it was only in a few states, in Louisiana and Oregon. And basically the Supreme Court ruled today with an application of the 14th Amendment and selective incorporation, which is important for AP Gov, that all jury decisions in federal and in state court must be unanimous. By the way, there is another court case that you need to know for AP Gov that has to do with the 6th Amendment and 14th Amendment. Does anyone know which one that is? Had to do with the right to counsel. If not, that's okay. I know there's a cram session happening right now with Gov. There's one tomorrow. In that case, I'm going to see if anyone knows. I'm going to wait like 2 extra seconds. Yeah, have fun. fun class. It's Gideon v. Wainwright. It's a great case. It basically says that if you can't afford an attorney, you are obligated, you have to be given one. And previously, in certain states, you had to be tried for a felony or up, I believe, in order to actually get an attorney. So Gideon v. Wainwright applied the 14th Amendment and the 6th Amendment to basically ensure that everyone gets an attorney if they can't afford it. All right. And yeah, we'll turn it over to some fun news that Fatima and I will both talk about. So our first piece of fun news is that Michelle Obama, our previous first lady, is now reading her favorite childhood books. And you can tune in, I think, on PBS. Today she read some books a few hours ago, so that's always fun.
Yeah, and so also we've talked about this a couple times, but there are like pet adoptions are going up. There's more people that are adopting pets, and so that's always a good thing, especially when you consider that there's so many pets that are like in the like system of like shelters, and a lot of shelters, simply because they can't like keep up with the amount of like animals that they have to like take in, have to turn to like euthanizing animals. So if you can, think about fostering a pet, or like even looking into adopting one, because that's always a good thing to do. And you'll get a friend, a furry friend. And so yeah, but on that note, that's all the happy news we have for today. But there's more interesting stuff that's happening in terms of 2020 elections. In Wisconsin, we've talked about last week how even though Governor Tony Evers tried to stop the primary election / like elections that were happening a couple weeks ago, the Supreme Court went ahead and said that the election had to take place. And so the reason why he tried to stop the election was because he didn't want people to have to like choose between whether or not they would potentially contract COVID-19 or be able to like take place in this election. And so what ended up happening was Joel Karofsky, who was running to be a judge on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, ended up defeating Daniel Kelly, who was the conservative incumbent. And so this was sort of surprising, right? Because one of the main reasons why Republicans in the Wisconsin legislature were pushing so hard for this election to happen, and also on like the conservative majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, was because they thought that Daniel Kelly would win, but also it would be like a very good election for Republicans in general. And so this is like a huge upset, especially because the total television ad spending for Kelly ended up being more than $1.4 million. And there was only like $400,000-ish that were in support of Karofsky. And so this was kind of surprising, not only because of the amount of money that went in, but also because Republicans were pushing so hard for this election to happen because they thought it would like help with voter suppression efforts. And so this like Karofsky winning means that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin's conservative majority is now one person down. So it used to be a 5-2 majority, and now it's a 4-3 majority, which means that in the future, going forward, it's easier for liberals to be able to like flip it to favor them. And so, like, as we talked about a couple seconds ago, one of the reasons why this election was like particularly problematic was because a lot of people who did request absentee ballots never got theirs. A lot of them were never mailed out, and some that were mailed out, people ended up saying that they just never received them. And so a lot of people, like there were people standing like 6 feet away in lines. And so lines were like wrapping around the block, and only 5 of the 180 polling places in Milwaukee were open. So this was like a huge effort that Wisconsin Republicans were trying to like push in order to suppress Democratic votes. And so surprisingly, at least in the case of like Joe Karofsky, that didn't end up happening. And so voting rights in Virginia are expanding. And so that's really awesome. So Governor Ralph Northam, he signed some legislation that will expand voting rights and access to voting in general. The first thing that this legislation does is that it makes Election Day a holiday. And so you guys might remember this, but in 2016, Bernie Sanders made this like a very big like point of things that should happen in terms of like democratic electoral reform. Because making election day a holiday would make it easier for people to vote because they wouldn't have to like potentially take off work, especially if you're like an hourly wage worker, then it's like harder to take off that day if you like really need that money in order to like feed your family, pay rent, stuff like that. So making election day a holiday will potentially it's an effort to make voting easier and increase like accessibility. He also removed a requirement that makes voters show their photo ID prior to casting their ballot. So this doesn't mean that you don't have to be like registered to vote. It just means that you don't have to actually show your photo ID to someone before like casting your ballot. So yeah, people are still going to be having easy access to the ballot in this case. And also, early voting will be allowed within 45 days before an election without a stated reason. So this pretty much just means that you can go and vote early. You don't need a reason why. And so this is like kind of awesome because it means that you don't have to be like sick or out of like the county the day of the election. You can just show up to the polls and vote early if you don't want to have to wait in a super long line the day of like an election. So all of this is in the effort to make voting easier for people. So woohoo, voting rights. But the opposite is happening in Texas. Can someone vote more than once if there are more lenient identification systems? So the answer to this question is twofold because a lot of voting systems are like electronic, right? So if you already voted and like you cast your ballot, then like you can't really do that again. But at the same time, there's not really people that are even trying to vote twice. Like, really, who's doing that? You know? So like a lot of people, especially like on the more conservative side, say that voter ID laws are important in order to prevent like voter fraud. But if you like look at it, the empirics on like voter fraud, they really show that like not a lot of people at all are trying to commit it. Like it's like 0.00 like 0 something percent. That's not the exact number, but it's like a very, very small, like cases of voter fraud are really rare. So like the idea of voter ID laws are oftentimes they make voting a lot harder because a lot of people just can't like they might not have a driver's license because like they take the bus all the time, or they might have to like pay to get a passport made, but they're not like planning to go anywhere when it comes to like traveling internationally or on a plane. So yeah. Yeah. Also, people don't even want to vote once, so expecting people to vote twice, it's really not something that we should be way too worried about. But in Texas, election officials, they're trying to expand voting by mail for the July election. So in July, there's a couple runoffs happening, like the Senate race between like MJ and Royce West. I think that's in July. And so there's a lot of stuff that's happening, especially around like these officials. They want to make sure that voting by mail is accessible because of the fact that COVID-19 is such like a easily spreading virus. And so Greg Abbott, who's the governor, he hasn't really taken a clear position on this, and whether or not he's going to be like helping this expansion happen. But the Attorney General of the state of Texas, he's saying that he'll fight it. And so he's even already like gone to court to like stop lawsuits that will make it easier for Texans to vote by mail, which like if you think about it, the reason why people who are like filing these lawsuits, they want it to happen so people like don't get sick and like contract COVID-19, especially because it spreads so easily. And so currently in the state of Texas, you can only vote by mail if you're not going to be in your home county, like if you like potentially go to college in another county, and you live there, if you're over the age of 65, if you're in jail and you're eligible to vote, or you're disabled. And so a couple of these lawsuits have been like aimed at expanding like the definition of a voter who's like disabled. But like Paxton is still trying to like fight that. And so this is like really problematic for election officials, especially because they don't know how to prepare, because they don't know how these court cases are going to pan out. So some election officials are like, should we get more machines and like have like more of them spaced out, so people can like obey social distancing laws and like have all these machines be like 6 feet away and have more polling places in order to accommodate that? Or should we have less polling places so there's like less people gathering? So there's also like this one story where a county is thinking about buying like hundreds of thousands of pencils so people can like vote with the eraser and like click the screen with an eraser instead of like having having people like touch it, the little turn thingy that Texans use to vote. And some people in some counties are thinking about having drive-through voting, but they can't exactly prepare any of these plans until it's like more clear what's going to happen with this election, whether or not they're going to like expand voting by mail or not. So all of these questions are making it a lot harder for election officials to decide what to do. And on that note, Brandon is going to talk about a Kansas Senate race that's happening that is shaping up to be really competitive. So, Brandon?
Alrighty, so it's looking more and more like, I think we started current event streams in like November, and back then we were like, oh, Republicans are definitely going to keep the Senate because they have a 53-47 lead right now. Also, Doug Jones of Alabama is more likely than not going to lose a seat. So that means that Democrats have to flip at least four seats and the vice presidency, or five. Might be doing my math completely wrong here, but they need to flip a lot of seats basically. And many were saying that the usual swing states of Maine, North Carolina, and maybe Michigan would flip red. I don't know, but there was a lot of talk about how Republicans had the favorable map in 2020, but unfortunately, it seems like in the state of Kansas, Chris Kobach, the former, I'm forgetting which secretary was, but he was in the Trump administration, and basically he was the chair of like the voter fraud commission, which produced a report that said that there was no voter fraud in 2016. And then he ran for governor in 2018, lost by 5% in Kansas, which is a very, very red state, just like I think it was like 50,000 votes or so. And now it looks like he could possibly be a front runner for the 2020 Kansas Senate race. And the problem with Chris Kobach is that he's incredibly unpopular in the state of Kansas, even as a Republican, which is why he lost in 2018. And so we've seen that State Senator Barbara Bollier raised $2.35 million during the first 3 months of 2020, and she might become the first Kansas Democrat elected to the U.S. Senate since 1932. We've seen that some other candidates, including Bob Hamilton, and there's a state representative from Kansas who's also running. They haven't actually had quite as much money, but we've seen people like Mr. Hamilton self-loan himself $2 million, which is kind of getting close to Barbara Bollier's like money where she raised from like small dollar donations, just kind of like her whole campaign message. And so it shows that Democrats are making inroads in a lot of states that many people think are very conservative, like in Montana and in Kansas, even potentially in Alaska, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, that's everything we had for today's live stream. Thank you for showing up and supporting us. We really, really appreciate it. Follow all of our social media accounts, including our TikTok, because it's fantastic. I'm biased, but it's still great. Also, you should make sure that you check out all of the different streams in AP Lang, AP GoPo, and across all the different disciplines, including the stream in 6 minutes, which will be run by me, calculus. And finally, I highly encourage you check out our GoPo and Lang teams specifically because we spend all of our effort making this wonderful live stream. So you should definitely go support our endeavors on Mondays and Tuesdays for AP Lang and AP GoPo. And yeah, that's pretty much all we had for today. And thank you for coming here to support us.
If you guys have any last questions?
Yeah, any last questions?
In the chat, but it seems like no one does. So
we love y'all.
With that, we'll see you guys next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye.